Hey, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to take just one single line of poetry, 10 little words, and unpack it to reveal, believe it or not, a whole revolutionary philosophy on how to live.
All right, here it is. The busy bee has no time for sorrow. Now, this comes from William Blake's Proverbs of Hell, which is pretty intense, but the line itself, it sounds almost like a simple folk saying, right? Kind of like something you'd tell a friend to cheer them up.
But you know, with a guy like Blake, nothing is ever that simple. So is he just telling us to, get busy? Or is there something way deeper going on here? A radical take on action, on meaning, on how our emotions even work? Well, that's what we're here to do. Let's start peeling back the layers.
Okay, so first layer, psychology. How in the world does this simple proverb tap into the deep mechanics of how our minds actually work?
So Blake's core idea here it's pretty provocative. He's basically saying that sorrow isn't some big, inevitable force we just have to put up with. No, he thinks it's more like a weed that grows in the empty spaces left behind when we're not doing anything. It's a byproduct of stagnation, of having no real purpose.
And what's crazy is how modern this idea feels, even though it's centuries old. I mean, it lines up perfectly with the modern psychological concept of flow. You know that state, right? When you're so completely absorbed in what you're doing that time just vanishes. Your ego kind of melts away, and all those nagging anxieties, they just fade out. It's almost like Blake knew, way back when, that if you're totally engaged in your craft, there's literally no mental real estate left to grow misery.
And this brings us to a really important point. The bee isn't just distracting itself from being sad. This isn't about avoidance. It's about transcendence. Its life, its purpose is so all-consuming that sorrow can't even get a foothold. It's not running from it, it's flying right over it. Okay, so we've got the personal psychology down. Now let's zoom out, because this idea explodes from our inner world into a really sharp critique of society. For Blake, this stuff wasn't just about self-help. Oh no, it was deeply political.
You see, Blake was, let's just say he was not a fan of the power structures of his time. He looked at institutions like the organized church or the idle rich, and he saw systems that basically profited from making people feel guilty and sad. Why? Because it kept them in a state of spiritual inertia. For him, a passive, sorrowful population is a much easier one to control.
And this right here just lays it all out. On one side, you've got the bee, the laborer, the creator, just buzzing with active, productive energy. And on the other, the priest. Blake saw this figure as just a passive watcher, a judge, so he throws all his support behind the creator. He's arguing that just doing things, making things, that's a form of resistance against systems that want you to just sit still. And to really hammer his point home, Blake uses some amazing animal imagery. Let's dig into another one of his big comparisons.
So think about a horse. It's obedient, right? It follows the path its rider sets out for it. It represents instruction, following external rules. But the bee? The bee is totally different. It moves based on its own autonomous energy, its own inner, instinctive desire. It's not looking at a map, it's not reading a holy book, it's just acting on its own nature. And in that simple act, Blake suggests, it finds a kind of secular grace. And this is the whole point. Right here, Blake believed that this kind of self-directed action is its own form of spiritual protection. It shields the bee from what he calls the pestilence of unacted desires. And man, isn't that a powerful phrase? That very specific human misery that comes from wanting something, wanting to do something, and just not doing it. Okay, so all of this is building up to the very core of this proverb. And it's a seriously radical idea about what it even means to be alive.
You could almost see this as a sneak preview of existentialism, like way before anyone was even using that word. It's this idea that meaning isn't something you just find lying around or something that's handed down to you from above. Nope. It's something you have to actively create every single moment by defining yourself through your work, through what Blake calls your sweet delight. So he basically gives us this really stark choice. It's the prolific versus the devouring. The bee represents the prolific. That's the force of creation, of making, of doing. And sorrow? That's the devouring force. It's what feeds on the emptiness when there's no production. So, for Blake, being busy, well, that's choosing life.
All right, so as we start to pull all these threads together, it's become crystal clear that this proverb is so much more than just a cute saying about keeping busy. It's an entire philosophy packed into 10 words. So what's the big takeaway from Blake's philosophy here?
Well, first, he's totally rejecting this idea that there's something noble about suffering. Forget that. Second, he's saying the active life is the only real path to bliss. It's all about energy and autonomy. The bee becomes his symbol for the liberated individual, someone who finds their own kind of divinity, not by kneeling in prayer, but in the nectar they gather from their own efforts.
And that leads us to this final brilliant takeaway. For Blake, the Palace of Wisdom isn't some destination you finally reach. It's not a trophy you get at the end of the game. It's a state of being. It's a dynamic, living process that you can only maintain through constant, purposeful motion.
Which of course leaves us with one last question, one that turns all of this right back around to you. See, Blake believed that every single person has a poetic genius inside them. So the question he'd probably ask is this: what is the nectar your genius is meant to gather? What's the work for you that will leave no room and no time for sorrow?